Hey, this is Tyler. Welcome back. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for joining me on this ongoing journey and adventure. Last time, we traced the arc from fire through the steam engine to our modern information deluge. We dug into how mastering new energy sources from coal and oil to nuclear has reshaped every corner of our world, and how the great debt and managerial cycles drive both boom and bureaucracy in our institutions. Today, though, we're going to pivot from engines and algorithms to something even more personal: the human side of wealth and opportunity. We'll explore how inequality strains the social fabric, why our career paths so often feel like rigged games, and how regrets that haunt us at life's end point us to something deeper about meaning and purpose. This episode and probably the next one are going to jump around a bunch, so thanks for your patience as we wrap up this series on meaning and purpose, and I attempt to tie in all the ideas that have been swirling around in my brain. So, whether you're climbing a corporate ladder, wrestling with personal anxieties, or simply wondering how to leave a legacy worth remembering, this episode might be for you. So, let's dive in. Inequality is a force that shapes how communities hold together or tear apart. On one side of the equation, we have equality of opportunity. That's the promise that every child born into the world should have a fair shot. Equal access to education, the chance to apply for any job, the hope that hard work can lead somewhere. On the other side lies equity. This is the idea that outcomes should be equal regardless of effort, talent, or contribution. Imagine a race where we not only give everyone a fair start, but then drag the leaders back to the pack. Suddenly, not only is ambition punished, but innovation stalls, and the very incentive to compete vanishes. That's why equity is a terrible idea in practice. As we discussed in the fairness paradox, life will never be uniformly fair. Some people will naturally excel in athletics, others in academics or the arts. Trying to enforce equal outcomes undermines the meritocratic backbone that has historically enabled societies to cooperate, reward effort, and foster genuine progress. When rewards detach from achievement, you get mediocrity and resentment, not shared prosperity. True social cohesion lies when everyone agrees the rules are fair and then competes under those rules, knowing that effort and talent matter. Likewise, deep in our DNA, sexual selection has always reinforced this competence and value hierarchy. Think of the peacock's tail. Its dazzling feathers serve no survival purpose, but they signal to mates the bird's vitality. In our own species, and specifically for men, displays of wealth, status, or intelligence act like those feathers. They create visible markers that elevate some while leaving others feeling inadequate. Similarly, for women, youth, beauty, proportion, and symmetry serve as markers of fertility and attraction. As we've discussed at length, this is unfair, but it's part of our evolutionary history, and it's ingrained in our DNA, and therefore we need to discuss it. Evolutionarily, this makes sense. Picking a strong partner who could increase the odds of healthy offspring is beneficial for women, so they're predisposed to naturally be attracted to men with resources and the ability to acquire them. Likewise, men are heavily drawn to beauty and fertility and less interested in status and achievement. A landmark cross-cultural survey, over 10,000 individuals across 37 societies, found striking sex differences in mate preference. Fully 80% of women rated a prospect's partner's financial prospects as very important, compared with only 40% of men. In contrast, 75% of men placed physical attractiveness in their top 3 preferences versus just 14% of women. This illustrates hypergamy. It's the tendency of women to seek mates of equal or higher social and economic status, which has been observed in nearly every culture that we've studied. Likewise, men's preference for youth and fertility is nearly universal. On average, men prefer partners 2 to 3 years younger than themselves, a pattern that's consistent from small scale hunter gatherer groups to modern urban societies. These evolutionary dynamics aren't commentary on individual worth, however. So let me make that clear. They're not commentary on individual worth. They are, however, biological legacies that are baked into our DNA. And if we recognize them, it helps explain why displays of wealth and status still confer social power to men and why youth and beauty remain potent signals for women, even in societies striving for gender equality. Understanding these drives is crucial, not just for excuses for unfairness, but as the first step towards creating social systems that channel our deepest instincts into healthy relationships. This tendency for women to only marry up and for men to marry across and down from a social status perspective ripples through entire societies, concentrating wealth, land, and power in even smaller circles. And this has been true ever since that we've developed an agrarian culture. So it's been true for a long time. When a handful of high status men can accumulate multiple wives, their estates grow as their households expand, while less connected men find themselves locked out of marriage altogether. This imbalance fuels envy, social unrest, and ultimately the breakdown of communal bonds. Much like the 700 wives and 300 concubines Solomon amassed in ancient Israel, which solidified his dynasty's wealth, yet sowed the seeds of his inequality and conflict. Take a look. It's in 1 Kings 11. What began in our tribal past as mostly monogamous pair bonding for mutual survival, under city state hierarchies aided by the agrarian revolution, mutated into harems for rulers, pathologizing human relationships and leaving common folk to struggle for genuine relationships. Now, it's not always the case. Pair bonding is definitely the norm. But due to this revolution, we ended up with a pathological system that still exists in our societies today. So we've got to recognize the dangers of unchecked hypergamy. The biblical tradition elevated monogamy as the ideal, even if practice often fell short. In the Torah, Deuteronomy 17:17 warns Israel's king, he must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray, articulating an aspiration to limit polygynous excess. Although Solomon and other monarchs routinely ignored that command, the one man, one woman model remains the cultural aspiration rooted in pair tribal bonding, where lifelong partnerships pooled resources and prevented any single male from monopolizing multiple spouses. That ideal surfaced with force only after the rise of Christianity. While Roman law never really fully outlawed concubines, the early church councils explicitly condemned polygyny. And by the early medieval period, Western Europe had enshrined monogamy in both canon and secular law. Kings and nobles who violated the rule risked censure and legal penalties. By making monogamy enforceable, these societies curtailed the ability of the elites to amass harems, thereby preserving a rough equality of marriage opportunity among men and women and preventing the worst distortions of status driven marriage. In doing so, they helped maintain social cohesion by ensuring that resources and spouses could not be hoarded by a powerful few. Now, there's a dark paradox at play here. In a strictly polygynous system, many women willingly enter the harem, so long as they secure access to a powerful man's resources, food, protection, and status. Think about the amount of women today who are happily willing to have Elon Musk's children. Yet each additional wife disenfranchises a would-be partner, leaving an army of unmarriageable men with no stake in the social order. Now that's like a extreme example, but anthropologists have long noted that surplus unmarried men dramatically increases the risk of violence, social unrest, and factionalization. To prevent this destabilization, societies across time and geography, from small hunter gatherer bands to sprawling medieval kingdoms, have reinforced monogamy as the practical solution. It's undeniably unfair. Talented men should not be penalized for their prowess, nor should beauty or fertility alone dictate a partnership. Yet, the historical record is unambiguous. Monogamy, as a majority of relationships in society, is the singular model that consistently preserves both social cohesion and individual happiness, balancing the evolutionary drives of sexual selection against the need for a stable, functioning society. History likewise offers cautionary tales of rising inequality, not just among sexual selection. For instance, in the late Roman society, vast estates consolidated wealth in the hands of a shrinking aristocracy, while the plebs sank into landless poverty. As emperors debased the currency to pay mercenaries and gladiators, trust in the Roman civilization and currency collapsed, and with it, the empire's cohesion. In China, land concentrated by powerful clans left tenant farmers destitute. When famine finally struck, revolts ripped through the countryside faster than the dynasty could respond. Closer to our own shores, in the Gilded Age, America saw rail barons and steel tycoons amass fortunes that dwarfed the wages of factory workers. When the Panic of 1893 triggered mass unemployment, social unrest mushroomed, laying fertile ground for populist insurgencies and labor strikes. Each of these societies ignored the warning signs. When a few hoard too much and the many get too little, unity fractures. People stop seeing themselves as part of a shared project and turn inward, clinging to narrow identities or lashing out at perceived others. Their tribalism runs rampant. If we care about national stability today, we have to reckon with both the evolutionary origins of status competition and the historical costs of letting inequality run unchecked. Because no empire, ancient or modern, can survive when its foundation is built on widening gulfs between the rich and the poor. Next, we're going to shift into careers, credentials, and institutional failures. We're going to make a hard shift here because to combine these ideas together is getting much harder towards the end of our series. In my experience, there are three viable career pipelines: the university or professional track, the apprenticeship or certification route, and the grinding the corporate ladder route. But most people, I feel like today, are pushed into only one path, and that is the university path. The single track mindset has created credential inflation, elite overproduction, and drowning students in useless degrees and mountains of debt because we told them if you get a degree, it'll be your ticket to a middle and upper class lifestyle. But in reality, higher education should be reserved for fields that truly require deep professional training, things like medicine, engineering, and law, rather than catch-all that simply feeds the ever-expanding university system. And university is probably not a good route for more than 50% of society. Now take the university route. For decades, a bachelor's degree was the ticket to middle class. Now it's a baseline requirement for entry-level roles that once hired high school graduates. Credential inflation means you must stack master's degrees and professional certificates just to stand still, at the cost of crushing student debt that takes years, sometimes decades, to repay. And worse yet, graduates often discover a skills mismatch. Their essays and exams didn't prepare them for project management, digital fluency, or client negotiations that their jobs demand. A diploma no longer guarantees competence, but it does guarantee a balance sheet liability for those students. The apprenticeship model, however, where mastery grew from hands-on mentorship and on-the-job training, has largely faded in many high-paying fields, at least in the Western societies. Trade schools and certificates struggle for respect, even as electricians, welders, and dental hygienists earn incomes that outpace many white-collar roles these days. We've undervalued practical experience in favor of academic credentials, obscuring a direct route to both meaningful work and solid paychecks. One often overlooked path is to join a company or the military at the entry level. And if you bring high conscientiousness, grit, and reliability, you can climb the ranks through sheer hard work. Many employers will even sponsor your continuing education as you prove your value on the job. You learn the unwritten rules, how to deliver on deadlines, anticipate needs, and build trust with colleagues while steadily taking on more responsibility. This earn your stripes route doesn't require a pricey degree up front. It requires persistent effort and loyalty with each promotion. I'm not saying that these paths are going to be right for everyone, but I do see the world as shaped into these three paths. But these paths have been reshaped by what James Burnham identified as the managerial revolution. Today's corporations are dominated not by risk taking entrepreneurs, but by professional bureaucrats who prize process control over pioneering ideas. Excesses of credentialed managers fueled by elite overproduction have diluted the ranks of true innovators. Instead of cultivating new products or markets, many firms now advance those who best navigate internal politics, tighten procedures, and protect the status quo, leaving creative problem solvers crowded out by a swelling tide of administrators. There's a disconnect within society when we elevate managers over creators. And this also creates a paradox that can lead to societal collapse. When we no longer have people who create, but only people who manage, think about that. Consider Boeing. For decades, its engineers set the global standard for airframe design until a new breed of managers and finance executives took the lead. Then cost cutting measures, schedule pressures, and detached oversight became the priorities. Critical safety features, like the software on the 737 MAX, were designed under opaque managerial processes rather than transparent engineering review, or what was best for the technical design. And then they experienced tragic crashes in 2018 and 2019 that showed how a company that once prized aeronautical innovation has become trapped in spreadsheets and hierarchy, with frontline engineers sidelined by bureaucrats who are more concerned with quarterly goals than passenger safety. Or look at Kodak. In the 1970s and 1980s, Kodak's chemists and inventors literally created the digital camera. Yet successive waves of corporate managers, driven by market share metrics and core business mandates, saw digital photography as a threat to their profits rather than an opportunity. Instead of nurturing those innovations, they funneled resources into financial engineering and cost centers, eventually forcing Kodak into bankruptcy, as nimble challengers embraced the new technology and took their place. Now, these examples show the paradox of the managerial revolution. When finance and process eclipse creation and risk-taking, you end up with companies that can no longer innovate and societies that lose both the wonder of new ideas and the resilience to adapt. Without a healthy balance of creators and managers, we risk eroding the very foundations of progress and stability that has made the United States so great. If we want careers that fulfill and institutions that thrive, we need to recalibrate. We need universities to refocus on critical thinking and technical mastery rather than chasing credentials or quotas or DEI. We need apprenticeships and trade certifications, and those must remain prestigious because skilled hands and practical know-how will always be in demand. And corporate hierarchies need to reward real-world results, not just polished presentations. And they need to focus on ensuring that the next generation of people can continue to grow in their ranks. I'm not saying that they have to do this just because. I'm saying because that's what benefits them in the long run. Only by restoring balance among these three pathways Can we rebuild career systems that serve both individual potential and societal needs? Next, we have the betrayal and the moral crises that we have in our society. Perhaps nothing severs the bond of trust faster than the hierarchy betrayal in finance. In 2008, banks that pitched themselves as prudent stewards of people's money gambled on subprime mortgages. And then, when the House of Cards collapsed, taxpayers were left holding the bag. The dramatic fall of Lehman Brothers and the frantic bailouts of AIG and too big to fail banks weren't just economic events, they were moral ruptures in our society. Ordinary people lost their homes, jobs, and savings, while executives walked away with multi-million dollar bonuses. When those at the top violate the rules without consequence, they erode the very foundations of our financial and social contracts. This pattern repeats across sectors. Corporate corruption, from Enron's off balance sheet fraud to Volkswagen's Dieselgate emission scandals. They show us how executives can manipulate standards for short term gain. In politics, we've watched elected leaders stall investigations, trade favors, and accept legal or illegal campaign contributions, confident that they'll escape accountability. Each scandal deepens public cynicism. Bankers, CEOs, and lawmakers can break the rules. Why should honest citizens play by them? We once prided ourselves on holding the moral high ground. In the aftermath of World War II, the Nuremberg trials set a global standard. Even heads of state could be held accountable for crimes against humanity, and justice was administered with painstaking care to due process and impartiality. Those prosecutions weren't perfect, but they demonstrated a belief that no one, not even the architects of genocide, were above the law. Contrast that with our post 9/11 policies. Guantanamo Bay became a legal black hole where detainees were held indefinitely without trial, and sanctioned enhanced interrogation programs crossed lines that we once claimed were inviolable. Meanwhile, US backed CIA coups in Iran and Guatemala and Chile and beyond were justified in their name of national security or free markets or democracy, but often amounted to resource grabs or geopolitical gamesmanship. We replaced the rule of law with secret directives, extraordinary renditions, and back-channel manipulations, all at odds of the ideas that we championed at Nuremberg. In betraying those principles for short-term strategic gain, we've undermined our own power as a nation and our moral authority. When a nation abandons its professed values for raw power, it doesn't just erode trust abroad, it corrodes the social contract at home. Citizens observe the same government claiming to defend our freedom will often disregard its own legal and ethical constraints, thereby deepening cynicism and weakening the very institutions that once made America a beacon of justice. To truly reclaim our moral standing, we must first turn inward and heal our own house. That means ending our era of perpetual interventionism, resisting the urge to brandish military power as our primary foreign policy tool, and instead recommit to principled neutrality and diplomatic engagement and competition, much as we did before World War II. Domestically, we need to reinvest the trillions spent on endless wars into rebuilding our infrastructure, strengthening public education, and shoring up our social safety nets so that every citizen feels protected. Only by demonstrating that we value peace, justice, and the well-being of our own people above raw geopolitical leverage can we begin to restore the moral authority we once held. Next, we've got what battles to fight. How do we experience regret? True courage isn't just rushing headlong into every conflict. It's having the wisdom to choose which battles are truly yours to fight. A valiant, untrained warrior who leaps into a skirmish may display bravery, but they die quickly. and often due to a fight that never mattered in the first place. By contrast, the most effective champions select engagements that align with their deepest goals and values and skills, and then they muster the discipline to say no to every other distraction. Too many well intentioned people burn out or get sidelined because they lack the foresight to discern which causes will benefit from their unique talents, which battles are theirs to fight. And this not only drains their energy, it also causes untold ramifications downstream. Cultivating this strategic discernment is every bit as important as valor on the battlefield. For instance, when people look back on their lives from their deathbeds, the most common regrets aren't about missed arguments or unwon conflicts. In her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, palliative nurse Bronnie Ware shares the lessons learned by hundreds of patients facing the end. They wish they had lived more authentically, not what others expected of them. They wish that they worked less and spent more time with loved ones, that they expressed their true feelings instead of bottling them up, and stayed in touch with friends rather than letting time and distance erode bonds. And finally, they wish that they allowed themselves to be happier, giving permission to feel joy rather than guilt. Those regrets point us to a simple formula for purposeful living. Choose authenticity, prioritize relationships, speak your truth, nurture your community, and cultivate joy. So, in our final section, let's revisit careers. In a world that pushes us towards comfort and security, it takes real courage to choose impact over comfort. A meaningful career isn't measured by a corner office or the size of your paycheck. It's measured by the problems that you solve and the people that you serve, even if it limits your social status. It might mean switching from a stable but unfulfilling corporate job to an apprenticeship in a trade that rebuilds your town's infrastructure. It could mean using your analytical skills to combat disinformation or joining a nonprofit that serves your purposes. No path is easy, but when your daily work aligns with your deepest values, that's when it addresses the battles you're uniquely called to fight. You craft not just your career, but a lasting legacy that you can be proud of and hold in high dignity. So today, ask yourself, which conflicts are truly yours to engage, and which should you let pass? By answering that, you ensure that your life's battles and your contributions truly matter. As we close this exploration, let's remember what we've uncovered. The ethical contours of wealth and power, from financial betrayals that fracture trust to the career choices that define our legacy. The moral stakes of inequality, where misaligned incentives can topple empires. And the strategic courage required to pick only the battles that align with our deepest values. We've seen how systems, universities, corporations, and governments too often prioritize process over purpose, and how individuals can reclaim agency by focusing on genuine creation, principled service, and wise restraint. In our next episode, Fanaticism and Ideology, From Nihilism to Extremes, we'll complete the circuit of our journey. We began this series by investigating and confronting nihilism, if you remember way back in episode 1, Life's Void of Meaning, and moved through the forging of process, the shaping of identity, and the building and breaking of tribes and institutions. Now we'll examine how belief extremes, whether radical cynicism or blind zeal, can drive individuals and societies to destructive ends. We'll ask, how does fanaticism take root? And what keeps us from falling into its abyss? For now, I leave you with this reflection. How will you rebuild your own moral economy? What principles will guide your pursuit of success, your wielding of power, and your service to others, so that in the end, your life and the systems you shape stand for something that transcends profit and prestige? So again, thanks for joining me on this journey and adventure. I'm glad you're here. I look forward to our next encounter, and good luck on your own journey.